Fighting games. They have been a staple genre in video games since the early 1990s when Street Fighter II hit arcades. The genre has experienced a resurgence of sorts lately, with more and more quality fighting games hitting the market. They are no longer the niche genre that they once were, and as such, many new players are looking to get into fighting games, so they can play with their friends or compete online. Though fighting games are more approachable than they ever have been before, they are still among the most difficult games to learn, which can make them quite intimidating. This is where I come in. I'm here to make the learning process a little bit easier by providing 5 basic strategies that will instantly improve your game. The goal is not to make you a pro, but to cultivate just enough skill so you are not complete garbage at fighting games.
Round 1. Fight!
Before we get started with the tutorial, there are some clarifications that need to be made. First, this is not a tutorial on how to play fighting games. This means that I will not be teaching you the controls for each fighting game, how to use the character's special moves for each fighting game, and I will definitely not be showing you how to perform combos in each fighting game. These are things that are specific to individual fighting games and are out of the scope of this tutorial. This tutorial is meant to teach you basic skills and strategies that will translate into any fighting game you play. Secondly, this tutorial will not make you a pro player. The fundamental strategies I discuss here will likely be enough to ensure that you beat your scrubby friends and can compete in the lower ranks of online play, and that is all. Lastly, the strategies presented in this tutorial work well in traditional head-to-head fighting games, though they may not work well in untraditional fighting games like Smash Bros. There is one last thing to consider. I will be presenting these 5 strategies within the game Street Fighter V, and I am using Street Fighter V because Street Fighter is a game pretty much every traditional fighting game is based off of. There are differences between 2D and 3D fighting games, and I will try to articulate those differences within the tutorial. With all of that out of the way, let us now proceed to improving your game. The first thing new players do when they get their hands on a fighting game is press all the buttons on their controller, and that is because pressing buttons is fun. You get to see your character do all sorts of cool things on the screen. However, pressing buttons randomly will not help you become good at fighting games. To become good at fighting games, you have to learn one essential skill, and that is blocking. Blocking is what separates good players from bad players. Blocking is actually pretty simple. You simply hold the back directional button on your controller whenever an opponent tries to attack you. If you are the character on the left side of the screen, you hold the left directional button. If you are on the right side of the screen, you hold the right directional button. Some fighting games like Mortal Kombat feature a block button, and in these games you will hold the block button instead of pressing and holding back. Most fighting games have 2 types of blocks, the standing block and the crouching block. In 2D fighting games, you will want to be using the crouching block the majority of the time. The reason being is that crouching blocks block both high and low attacks. The only types of attacks crouching blocks do not guard against are jumping attacks, or overheads, which are attacks that tend to strike from an upward angle. To perform a crouching block, you simply hold down back on your controller. That is the down and back directional buttons. In 3D fighting games, you'll want to be using the stand block most of the time, because crouch blocks do not block against mid attacks, which are the most common types of attacks used in 3D fighters. Blocking is very important because a good defense is necessary to play at higher levels. Blocking keeps you safe and prevents you from taking damage from your opponent. This will keep you in fights much longer, so practice blocking as much as you can. How do you practice blocking? Well, when you're facing an opponent, focus on blocking their attacks rather than attacking them. Do not worry about winning or losing the match. Just focus on blocking your opponent's attacks. This will get you into the habit of blocking regularly. Another thing new players of fighting games tend to do is spam special moves. Special moves are the powerful and unique attacks each character has, such as Ryu's Hadouken, Hurricane Kick, and the infamous Shoryuken. While they are fancy and powerful, an over-reliance on special moves can leave you at a disadvantage and open to counterattacks from your opponent. So instead of focusing on special attacks, I recommend new players instead rely more on their game's and character's basic attacks, which in 2D fighting games are often referred to as normal attacks or normals. Basic attacks are often executed with a single button press and do not require any extra special inputs like special moves do. Though it varies from game to game, most fighting games have at least 4 basic attack buttons. Street Fighter actually has 6. The light punch, medium punch, heavy punch, light kick, medium kick, and heavy kick. There are 3 main types of basic attacks. These attacks are standing attacks, which are performed while the character is standing in a neutral position, crouching attacks, which are performed while the character is in a crouching position, and jumping attacks, which are attacks performed while the character is jumping in the air. Some characters also have basic unique attacks, which are usually performed with the attack button and a single directional button. Some basic attack buttons can be pressed in succession to form what are called strings, or small sequences of basic attacks. Finally, there are throws, which are unblockable attacks that are good for breaking down an opponent's defenses. Basic attacks are very valuable because they are attacks that can be performed quickly, are relatively fast, and are not as risky to perform as special attacks. When used with the correct spacing and rhythm, basic attacks can easily set the pace of the match, which can give you the advantage in the game. So for new players just learning how to play fighting games, I recommend that they base their offense just around basic attacks, at least in the beginning. Again, do not worry about winning your matches, just worry about learning how to use each of your basic attacks and which best situations to use them in. When playing fighting games, you rarely ever want to be standing still, and that is because standing still makes you an easy target for your opponent. Instead, you want to be elusive, and you accomplish this by keeping your character in constant motion. This does not mean you want to be wildly dashing and jumping across the screen. You want your movement to be more deliberate. Specifically, you want to maintain a certain amount of space between you and your opponent. How much space will vary greatly depending on your situation. In general, you want to be at a range where you can hit your opponent, but your opponent cannot hit you, leaving you at a position of advantage. Again, this range will depend greatly on the games and characters you are playing. A general strategy would be to move back whenever your opponent moves forward, and to move forward whenever your opponent moves back. This way you always maintain a certain amount of space between you and your opponent. As beginners of fighting games, I encourage you to use this strategy in your matches to maintain space between you and your opponent. Focus on controlling your movements and staying at a range where your opponent cannot attack you. Using this strategy will greatly improve your game. One of the biggest mistakes new players of fighting games make is that they will go into a match with a single game plan and attempt to rush down their opponent. This strategy may work against the game's computer opponents, but you will quickly find that your flowchart game plan won't work quite as well against other humans because they are much less predictable. To improve at fighting games, you will have to learn how to play reactively. Playing reactively means reacting to your opponent's actions rather than simply rushing in and doing your own thing. Playing reactively allows you to develop an adaptable game plan. Instead of just hoping your strategy will work, you will let your opponent help you develop your strategy. Pay attention to what your opponent is doing and try to respond to their actions. As the old saying goes, knowing your opponent is half the battle. Playing reactively will also help you learn how to take advantage of your opponent's mistakes, a concept known as punishing. Using the 3 strategies I discussed before, blocking, spacing, and using basic attacks, you will play in a way that can often force your opponent to make mistakes. Playing reactively allows you to punish these mistakes. Punishing is a rather advanced concept of fighting games that is too complex to get into fully right now. In general, be sure to always retaliate when your opponent makes a mistake, such as missing attacks that are within your attack range, or performing risky special moves while you are blocking. Use these mistakes as opportunities to start your offense. Never let your opponent get away for free. So instead of focusing solely on what you're doing while playing a match, pay close attention to your opponent's actions and try to react accordingly. Use their actions to help formulate your game plan. In order to become good at fighting games, you will obviously have to learn how to actually play those fighting games. This means learning a game's specific mechanics and specific characters' techniques and tactics. Almost every modern fighting game has a tutorial mode that teaches you the basic mechanics of the game, so be sure to play through the tutorial a few times to get the hang of how the game plays. Some games have more than one tutorial or demonstrations that teach you more advanced aspects of the game, and I encourage you to play through these as well when you feel ready. Another great place to learn is the game's practice mode. In practice mode, you can experiment with your character and use the command list to learn how to perform special attacks. There is so much more you can do in practice mode, and it would take a whole other video to explain it all. For now, just use it as a safe place to experiment and practice your strategies and techniques. Finally, there are tons of sources outside the games that will help you learn them. Official strategies are a good place to start if you own one or are willing to buy one. Of course, there are also tons of texts and video tutorials created by the fighting game community to help new players. I'll have some links in the description to a couple websites to help you get started. If you truly want to get better at fighting games, you will need to practice and be willing to learn new ideas. So get to it. Alright guys, that is all for my fighting games for noobs tutorial. I hope these 5 strategies will prove helpful on your quest to improve at fighting games. Remember that these are just general and basic strategies that tend to work in most fighting games. Be sure to seek out other sources if you want to learn how to play a specific game or character. Thank you so much for watching.